If you have a laser, I'll show you how you can make this 24-sided marble maze. All you'll need is a 6mm steel ball bearing, 5 sheets of 10 by 20 3mm plywood of your choice, and the files. You can get those from the link, or you can design your own maze. So let's get to it.
Okay, our first cut is going to be to cut and engrave the top half of our main body and front face. So to do this, we're going to select a piece of material that's as defect-free as possible and get it situated in the laser. Then we're going to use a few hold downs to get it as flat and held securely as possible. Now this is really important because after we engrave this side, we're actually going to have to flip the pieces over to engrave on the other side. And to do this, you need to ensure that your template or holding piece does not move at all. So hold downs are necessary. All right, now that we're in Lightburn, we are ready to load in our first design. So I'm going to import front top SVG. This loaded in. First things first, let's set our X and Y coordinates. So I'm going to try 2030 and run a quick frame, make sure this fits on my material. Now it's important to note, right now we're cutting and engraving this first design, but next we need to actually flip each of these pieces over to engrave on the opposite side. Now to be successful doing this, it's easiest to work off your top right corner and then set an X and Y coordinate that's an even number. It's just easier to remember, easier to plug in. So with that said, another important thing to do, some of our designs actually have intersecting lines here. Now it should be set up properly in the file to only do one pass, but just to be safe, it's a good idea to turn on your optimization settings and turn on remove overlapping lines. All right, let's take a look at our layers here. So our first layer is this black outside cut. So we want to move that to the bottom. It looks like mine's actually turned off here. So turn that on and make sure your machine settings are set to a cut parameter. So 2065 is what works on my machine. Our second bottommost layer is this green pattern. This is our inside cuts. So again, cut settings. Then our only fill layer is going to be our start and finish. So we're going to move that up to the top and make sure that our fill is set not to go all the way through the wood, but burn it dark enough that people can see. So 180, 30 works for me. Then we have our maze engraving pattern. I like to do this actually as my third layer, and then let's set this to an engrave that won't go all the way through the material. So I like 250, 20. And then lastly, our second layer is going to be this indication text. This says which orientation the final piece is going to be, as well as each piece. Once we cut those out, we'll have to glue them on. This just helps you figure out where everything goes. All right, with all of that lined up, we are ready to go. All right, now we're ready to engrave the reverse side of these pieces. So the trick is to remove the main bodies without moving your outside border or template. So I use a hand pick, just slightly pull up on one of the edges, remove the pieces, and discard any of the waste material left on the inside. Now that our honeycomb tray is clear, we're ready to reinsert our main body. So each of these pieces is just going to flip over 180 degrees and be placed in the exact position it was before. So just line it up with your template and you'll be good to go. Now it's important to hold these pieces flat for engraving, so you can either move your hold downs or just use a little bit of masking tape and tape down the corners. All right, we are now ready to engrave the reverse side of these pieces. So we are going to select everything, make note of our X and Y, so 2030, and then delete the artwork and import front, top, reverse. Now we'll change our X and Y to match the previous design, so 2030. And now we can hop into editing our layers. So our outermost cut is going to move to the bottom, but we've actually already cut these pieces out, so we can turn that output off. Then we have our maze outline This will move to be our second layer. Now this is still going to be an engrave, so 250, 20. And then we have our indication text, which will be our top layer, also an engrave, 250, 20. And we are ready to go. With these pieces finished, we're ready to remove it from the laser. Now for our next cut, we will be doing a reverse side cut as well, so it's important to use hold downs when we insert our new material. All right, we are ready to move on to our third design. So I'm going to select everything, clean up our artboard, and import right SVG. All right, we need to set this to align on our new material. So I'm going to do 2030. I'll run a quick frame, make sure it lines up. Do the same on your machine. Again, your numbers might be a little bit different, but we do have to flip this piece over to engrave the reverse side of it. So use even numbers, something easy to remember. All right, let's take a look at our layers. So previously, we turned our cut layer off, so we want that output on, and we want that to be our bottommost layer. Green is our inside cut, and we want that to be the same. Now we have our maze engrave. So previously we had changed our parameters to be a cut. We need to move those back to be an engrave now. So we'll do 250, 20, 20. And then our indication text layer is our topmost layer, which will be an engrave as well. And this should be good to cut. Okay, now just like before, we need to flip our main piece over to engrave the opposite side. So I'm actually just going to remove the main piece and not even mess around with the stuff on the left-hand side just to ensure I don't move the template at all. Now, when you remove these two pieces, they actually act as one. So think of it one plane rather than two individual pieces, and they need to flip over 180 respectively. And once in place, we're just going to use a little bit of masking tape to hold them flat as well. Okay, we are now ready to engrave the reverse side of this, so we will select everything, make note of our X and Y, clean up the artboard, and import right reverse. First things first, set that to be the same X and Y. And now going over to our layers, our cut can go to the bottom, but also we've already cut that, so output can turn off. We have our indication text. This can move to the top and just ensure that those are proper engraving parameters. Oops, so 250, 2020. And then we have our engraving for the maze design. So that will be an engraving parameter as well. And we are good to run the file. And with that, all of our reverse engravings are done, and we are ready to move on to cutting the maze pieces. So remove everything from your crumb tray, and let's go. Okay, now that all of the hard stuff is done, we are ready to cut out each of these maze pieces. So we can select our artboard and import. Oh, we'll start with one. So there are 3 of these files. I'm only going to show you one. They are all the same. But basically, arrange your X and Y to fit on your material. So I'll do 2020, run a quick frame. But we are now only working with 2 layers. So our maze pattern, this is now going to be a cut for all of the final files. And you're cutting a lot of pieces here. You don't want to have to recut these, so make sure your settings are right to get through your material on the first time. So I'm going to actually slow it down just a little bit and up my power just a bit. And then we have our indication text. This is still an engrave, and we're ready to go. Once this is done, we will just do the same for each of the 3 maze pattern files. Here's a fun fact. Initially, I was concerned about saving as much material as possible. So instead of a maximum of 5 maze pieces per side, I actually cut everything up and had a max of 26 per side. That way I can nest everything a lot more cleanly. After doing a test, it was an absolute mess, and I realized how bad of an idea that was. Now, for removing your maze pieces, it's easier to keep them in groups just to make it workable. So you could either grab them out one at a time and stick them on things, or I'm actually just gonna run a quick strip of tape across here just to hold them in place, and that way I can remove the boards, use them one at a time.
With all of our pieces cut, we're ready to start assembling. Before you start, you're going to want to glue either wood glue in the toothpick or a fine needle super glue, and potentially a pair of tweezers. So first, we'll start with our main body. Now, there are orientation words engraved on here, so we see front and back. Another thing to note is your start is always going to be your front left corner. So we know this faces up, this is front. Now we have our other main piece, we see front and down, also up. So we know this is up, this is front, and up. These should slide together like so. Okay, so we know start is our front left corner. This next piece here is going to say right and up. So if we know start is front left, that means this way faces right, and this direction is up. That will slide in. Then while we're here, we can also right, slide that together. Then you just do a little bit of wiggling, line up the pieces, and they'll slide right in. Now, typically, I don't glue the main pieces together. I will use our side pieces to do it. Now, important thing to note on our side pieces is in the center, we will have the direction that the side faces. So this is up. Our wording always points down. So we'll go in just like this. Now, our large grid pieces also have directions on the sides. Just to know, does it go this way or does it go this way? So, keeping start at a front, we know that this is up, this is left, this is right, this fits together like so. Now, you will glue these pieces on, but I recommend doing a dry fit just to make sure everything fits before gluing. So now this one also faces up. We know it will be on the up direction. And we will do that for the remainder of the pieces. With everything put together, we know that we've assembled it correctly. Now, you can pull one piece off at a time and add glue to secure it. I find it easiest just to go through and add a few drops in each of the low points. Add a little bit of pressure, and then move on to the next piece. We'll repeat for all of the sides. Now that the main body of the puzzle is assembled, it's time to start gluing on the mazes. So you'll see that each maze itself has a letter. So A, B, C, D. The way that the puzzle nests together, it's best to glue in alphabetical order. So start at A, end at F. All right, let's start gluing. We can find our A pieces and match where they go. So you'll also notice we have our letters on the matching piece. Those letters will always face down and not be visible. Just make sure when you glue, line up, you see where it goes, and you can take it, add a few drops of glue to all of your outmost edges. Be careful not to put on too much so it doesn't squeeze out. And then you can either hand place it, or sometimes I find it easiest just to use a pair of tweezers and line it up inside the grid. If you're not perfect, we do have wiggle room with how that marble's going to fit in there. It's not the end of the world, but try and get it as close to perfect as possible. All right, with everything assembled, you're ready to add your 6 millimeter steel ball. Start playing.